Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Trusted Trustee podcast. And as usual, I'm joined by Tracey Bestis in the Southern Highlands of New South Wales. How are you, Tracey? As usual, it's good to see you.
Thanks so much, Darin. I'm doing remarkably well, thank you very much. And as much as
Remarkably well.
remarkably well, and as much as the weather should be warming up down here, Darin, it is still the Southern Highlands, and we're still having some cold days.
Oh, dear,
Never
oh
mind.
dear. Dear, oh dear, I can do without those. It's fairly mild in Sydney. It's certainly not hot, but it's okay. It's livable, I suppose you could say. And of
Good.
course, this podcast is brought to you by Superfund Property Valuations. Take the tension out of tax time by making Superfund Property Valuations your number one choice for all of your SMSF property valuation requirements. Order a report today by filling in your details online at superfundpropertyvaluations.com.au and let Superfund Property Valuations take care of the hard work. And as usual, a shout out to William Spark. I know he's probably working overtime there. And if you're listening to this podcast, Will, I hope you enjoyed the MotoGP season, which which wrapped up on the weekend there. I know he's not following it that closely, but I know he's a bit of a motorcycling fan, so I just thought I'd throw that in, just as an aside. Now, we're
And
doing
congratulations to Will actually on the recent award that he won as well. So I heard he won an award recently, so good on him as well.
yeah, good on him, but it might have been a competitors award, so I was
Yeah, sorry about that.
not getting too overboard, not going overboard about that. Anyway, we're doing something a little bit different today, and forgive me because I will actually be referring to something else on my screen. So if on the camera it looks like I'm a little bit distracted, that's what's going on. But some of you might have heard that ASIC recently released a report about SMSF advice.
Mm,
And probably as an extension to that, some people have interpreted it as the health of the SMSF sector. And we just thought that it would be useful to paint some context around that. I might start by saying that neither Tracey nor myself are of the belief that everything's perfect in the world of SMSS. Of course, it isn't.
mm,
It's like any other pursuit in the world. We don't live in a utopian society, and of course, there are always going to be issues that need to be addressed. But we just thought we'd need to paint some context around what this report actually represents and how potentially flawed some of the conclusions. One in particular, there was an article written in the Sydney Morning Herald. I won't mention the journalist, but the person involved seems to have drawn a lot of conclusions about the health of the sector, which
mm.
I don't believe to be accurate. Of course, everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but I think more to the point, some common sense philosophies need to
Yeah,
be applied here. And I think most of the people listening to this podcast already are exercising those sorts of principles. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be listening to us anyway, and certainly wouldn't have come to our roadshow where we've met a lot of you anyway. But we'll start with the ASIC report, which dropped early in November, I think it was, and they came up with some conclusions around poor SMSF advice. Now, the first thing I would say, and I know Stacey, Tracey, I got Tracey and statistics mixed up, so I called you Stacey. I
all
apologize.
good. It's all good. I've been called much worse than that.
um, yeah, I mean the issue here is that ASIC compile and sorry, I was about to say Tracey will be going into more of the specific statistics that ASIC quoted when they
Yeah,
dropped the report. Now, I think the first thing that needs to be understood is that ASIC do plenty of sort of consumer reports and consumer research exercises, if you want to call it that, in the advice space. One of their most effective tools in the past has been what they call the shadow shopper. So
Mm.
the shadow shopper, they send representatives into advice firms without telling them that obviously they're from ASIC. And they walk through an advice process to say what would be appropriate for me and whatever. But when they do that, it's all random, right? So I
Yeah,
pick, there could be an advisor across the street if I'm from ASIC. I say, oh, there's an advice provider across the street. I'll go over there and test them, right?
yeah,
So I haven't chosen that person on anything apart from geographical convenience for me.
yes,
Now, with this report, they've actually only investigated advisory firms and advisors who have already marked red flags on the ASIC compliance book. So they've
yes.
identified these people as, look, bit of a worry there, bit of a red flag. Let's go and find out a little bit more about them.
Mhm.
So already context has to be painted around the sample size which they used to base this report. And ASIC, I have to say, ASIC didn't do anything to disguise that. They said that was the basis for this report. So
Yeah,
then to come to the conclusion that they've found issues with the people who raise red flags, it's not quite self-fulfilling prophecy, but it is um, consolidation of I thought there'd be problems, and I confirm they are. And it's a little
yeah,
bit like a serial speeder on the road. Darin's a serial speeder. Yes, he is on the road. And so I chose to ride with him, and he's a speeder. I found out he's a speeder. Well, you kind of knew that already before you got in my car. All you did
exactly.
was reaffirm what you thought originally. So
Bit of
that's the first.
confirmation bias. Yes.
100%. So that's the first. And again, I want to be perfectly clear. ASIC never did anything to disguise that. They're upfront about what their methodology was and what it represented. So if we go into some of the things that they found, Tracey, because I don't have any of the stats in front of me personally, but
Yeah.
I know you mentioned some that you've taken note of.
Yes. So, Darin, I think just to set the scene a little bit as well for our listeners who might not understand the role that ASIC have in this whole industry, is that just like the ATO are the regulator for the SMSF space, ASIC are the regulator for financial advisors, if you like. So they're the ones that kind of come out and monitor the financial advice space, and they, have their big stick, and they, whack the financial advisors with their big stick if the financial advisors are not doing the right thing. So, and there's a very valid reason for having ASIC in the financial advice space. My question with this report, and it's report number 824. And you're right, it did come out in early November. My question with this report is why? If ASIC they've not done a random sample. They've noted in, the page 5 of the report that the sample was not selected with the intention of being random or representative of the financial advice sector. Well, why did they do the report in the first place? Because it is a confirmation bias, right?
Yeah.
They've basically assessed 100 SMSF establishment advice files. Now, we know there was something like 30,000 SMSF set up in the last financial year. So not only have they kind of gone with, well, here are 12 advice firms, or 12 advice licensees, I should say, not advice firms, advice licensees that they've looked at, 100 advice files out of 30,000 files. It kind of, it doesn't really give a very good representation of the SMSF space at all.
No, definitely not. But at least they were 100% transparent as to how they
Correct.
selected the sample and whatever. So
Correct.
based on that, you can
Yeah.
actually draw a more accurate, I think, conclusion around what this actually means.
Yeah, yeah. So some of the numbers that came out of it, right? So of 100 client files that ASIC reviewed, they said in 38 of those files, the financial advisor demonstrated compliance with best interest duty and related obligations. Now, the best interest duty, just summarizing that very, very quickly, is about the fact that A financial advisor, when they give a recommendation to a client, they have to act in the best interest of the client. So, not in the best interest of themselves as a financial advisor, but in the best interest of the client. So, 38% of the client files that ASIC reviewed in this not random sample, in this very highly targeted selection of files, 38% or 38 of the files were in compliance with best interest duty. And then they said in 62 of the files, the financial advisor failed to demonstrate compliance with best interest duty. Now, I just want to pause there because that doesn't mean that the financial advisor necessarily did the wrong thing, in my opinion. It just says to me that the advice file didn't show enough. That doesn't mean that the financial advisor has ripped the client off or done anything untoward necessarily. They just haven't shown in that particular file enough for ASIC to say, okay, you're acting in the best interest. So we're not saying that all of them are dodgy.
No, and of course, I will,
Mm.
further context has to be painted around this as well.
Yeah.
Now, I've always said that whenever we speak to our trustee audience, I'm completely agnostic as to whether or not you receive advice or you don't receive
Mm.
financial advice. Our aim is just to give you more information so that you can run your fund a little bit better. So I'm not I'm not neither here nor there as in proponent or opposition to financial advice. But what I
Yes.
will say is what gets conflated in these situations and something you have to be really, really conscious of is that you would potentially suspect, just reading on the face value, that you're talking about SMSF advisors, right? And they're
Yeah.
not actually talking about SMSF advisors. So this is SMSF related advice as
Correct.
opposed to SMSF specialist personalized advice. There is a massive difference there,
Yes.
but conveniently they're always lumped together so that when a finding like this comes out,
Yeah.
then all of a sudden the sky's about to fall in because we told you that the SMSF sector is rife with issues, and particularly with the advice linked to that sector is rife with issues. There is a
Yeah.
huge difference, and I don't think any of the people who are caught up in this, as far as those bad statistics go, are
Mm.
specialist SMSF advisors. So again, if anything, it really reiterates the point that if you want to get advice around self-managed super funds, you need to get specialist personal advice that is
Yes.
absolutely 100% suitable to you. Now, you can't guarantee that that's gonna get you the best result all the time, and you won't face situations where you're not happy with and maybe something's gone wrong, but at least you eliminate most of the issues that this report is actually highlighting. So it's a very important distinction to make.
100%, Darren. I'm really glad that you brought that up. Because then the ASIC report goes a little bit further and it says, of the 62 files that they had a concern around, best interest duty being met, they said we have significant concerns about client detriment in relation to the SMSF establishment advice in 27 of the files. So it's 27 out of 100 of the files that they think is a potential detrimental, it's going to be detrimental to those clients in setting up an SMSF advice as opposed to not. So 27 out of 100.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you you mentioned at the top of the episode that you weren't sure why this exercise was actually undertaken when it's
Yeah.
almost like a confirmation of bias
Yeah.
exercise.
Yeah.
I think this has come up in light of some of the product failure issues that we're seeing right now. I think this one in particular, or the trigger for this, more than likely, a good chunk of it would be the UGC
Yes.
situation.
Yes.
This is where the process happened, where people were cold called about it. They were asked about their situation. Uh, the diagnosis was you would be suitable to have an SMSF. then
Yeah.
I'll put you on to another person who is an advisor, and they'll be able to advise you what to do, set up an SMSF. And then after that was done, bear in mind that that was the lowest level generalist advisor that you could ever come across. So I
Yeah.
don't think there was any particular specialized knowledge there,
Yes.
especially not about SMSFs. And then once that process was done, the advice then was to allocate a chunk of the portfolio
Hmm.
into the UGC products, which I think were property offerings,
Hmm.
and then uh, yeah, of course it collapsed, and all of a sudden you're in trouble. Now, just excuse me for a minute because I've just got to check the power source on my laptop. But continue the discussion. I apologize. I'm going to disappear for a quick period.
I think that you're right, Darin. And I just wish that ASIC would basically say, we did this report because of X, Y, and Z, because it takes unnecessarily, I think, the SMSF space and it enables people who want to do this us versus them. It enables those people to say, well, see, the SMSF space is bad. And the SMSF space is the only part of the industry that has all of these problems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the concern that I have around some of these reports that come out. If there's not specific reasons for the report and ASIC haven't set out, we did this report because of X, Y, and Z, then, to me, it just enables people to interpret things that perhaps are not there.
Yeah, and that's probably the danger that I'm always concerned about. I mean, again,
Hmm.
I will say until the cows come home that I don't believe that an SMSF is right for everybody.
Yes.
Everybody's circumstances are different,
Yes.
and what might be suitable for me will not be suitable for Tracey. So
Correct.
it's not a blanket, it's for everybody, and I think we all recognize that, but it allows some, what I would suggest are inaccurate conclusions to be made about the sector, which I just wouldn't want people to walk around thinking that, oh, have I made a mistake? Oh, have you read this thing, Tracey? Oh, I've got an SMSF. Should it be something that I'm concerned about? I don't. I'm concerned that that sort of fear mongering might get people a little bit nervous as to whether or not they're doing the right thing. And these are people
Yes.
who I'm sure would be doing a great job with their SMSF. And
Yeah.
if I could just highlight something, I did say that that we were sort of referring to to this article in the Sydney Morning Herald, which is a microcosm of exactly what happens when a bad report comes out like this, and
Mm.
then people
Mm.
extrapolate whatever conclusion that they want to what they want to say. And in this column, it says the dominant use now tends to fall into two camps. That's the dominant use of SMSF. Business owners who want to buy their premises and lease it back to themselves. That's business real property, which is actually a very powerful strategy to use an
Mhm.
SMSF for. And investors chasing high risk geared strategies. Well, my challenge to you out there who is listening to this podcast, did you set up an SMSF, and are you maintaining your SMSF to pursue those high risk geared strategies? Because I would actually say that in our newsletter and in our presentations, we don't do a lot of stuff on limited recourse borrowing arrangements, simply because I recognize that the percentage of SMSFs using an LRBA is not that great.
No.
There's still a portion, but obviously I want to appeal more to the masses, and I want whatever information we do to be representative of the situation that our readers are in.
Mhm.
And to make a statement like that, I think is inaccurate, uh, is the best way I can put it.
Yeah, totally, Darren. And it totally goes against, what ASIC have actually, an example that ASIC put into their report. And I read the 39 pages of the ASIC report. And ASIC actually specifically put this example into this report where it was appropriate for the SMSF to be set up. And it was a couple with the adult children. They sought advice, and the financial advisor identified the client stood to benefit from using an SMSF structure because of two reasons. The first one was that the couple sought to manage a portion of the SMSF defensive investments themselves, nothing about high risk chasing, massive amounts of return. They wanted tangibility and transparency that managing it themselves would give them. And the second part is that the couple could operate several different account-based pensions with different taxable and tax-free components. We've spoken about that in another podcast. And, they could do that all within one retirement vehicle. Which is one of the benefits of an SMSF, isn't it? That you can have multiple members and you can have multiple different types of accounts within the SMSF, and it's all within one structure. So that totally goes against with the comment within that article in the newspaper in the Sydney Morning Herald that there's only two cohorts of people with SMSFs or setting them up, one being business owners and the other chasing high risk investments. So the report and the article don't really line up, in my opinion.
Yeah, I know. I just can't see how you could draw that conclusion. But it's a
Yeah.
great. It's interesting, isn't it, Tracy? You just gave that example that ASIC provided, and
Yes.
that does actually speak a lot to the control of the SMSF. And of
Sure.
course, we know that a lot of the motivating factor behind having an SMSF is to take control, is for people to take control of their own retirement savings and to strategize what they
Yeah.
think could be the maximum outcome for their situation. But ASIC
Yeah.
actually did say something about control as well in the report, didn't they? Didn't it?
Yeah, they did, Darin, and they said that control shouldn't be one of the so what they actually said, it's part of the action points. So ASIC have put, a number of, say, a dozen action points within this report. And one of the action points they said was do not missell SMSFs on the basis of control, which we kind of go, okay, well, that's interesting. What does that mean? And then it basically says in here that where an advisor or where clients, sorry, have sought and or are recommended to establish an SMSF on the basis of having greater control, financial advisors should explore with the client what the notion of control means to them. So, control is not necessarily about control of the investments, because I don't think that too many people would actually think that they can control the investment marketplace. Can you control the property market, or can you control the share market? Can you control what gold is going to do or crypto is going to do or whatever you're invested in? We can't control that part, but we can control the structure. We can control the decision making. We can control the fact of having multiple account-based pensions in the one SMSF. We can control having one member or six members in the SMSF. There's a number of things that control kind of, ripples across, if you like, which is not control over a particular investment itself. So I think the notion of control is very difficult to be able to then put a pinpoint on, because if ASIC are going to say, well, financial advisors need to have had this conversation with their clients about what does control mean, how do we then assess that the financial advisor has actually had an adequate conversation? How do we,
Yeah.
what does the scorecard look like, Darin, in terms of how do we assess that? I don't know.
Well, I suppose they're going to have to record some detailed file notes as to what the client's reply was when I asked
Yeah,
them what their notion of control is. I'm not sure that 100%
yeah,
practitioners go into that level of detail, but
no,
again, it means something different for everybody, but it is important to understand that control is a bit of a flexible concept here. And
yeah,
well, one of the aspects of control is that ability to house business real property inside your fund. I mean, that's
yeah,
controlling not only just have the way that your superannuation fund works, but also how your business premises is being managed in that context as well. So, I mean,
yes,
again, you can't control whether or not that business premises is going to appreciate in value, but you can
yeah,
control, how you structure the whole thing in
yeah.
a superannuation context. So
Yeah,
yeah, that is important.
I think so. And Darren, the thing that always I just want to be really make it really clear, and I want people to understand that an SMSF is a structure. And I think that sometimes people get confused about this. An SMSF is not an investment. We don't invest in an SMSF. That's not an
No.
investment. It's a structure, just like a trust is a structure, or a company is a structure, or a partnership of people is a structure, or a sole trader is a structure. It is a structure only. And so when we say, that, there's this, there's problems with SMSF, it's not the SMSF that has the problem necessarily, it's the underlying investment. That's where the problem is lying. It's not the structure itself, it's the investment itself. And so whether you have that investment, that we've all seen in the media that, the investments that have gone wrong and people have lost a whole lot of money, it wouldn't matter if that was in an SMSF or a company or a trust or your own name, you would still lose the money anyway. It's not the SMSF that's losing it, it's the investment itself.
Yeah, I think some of the confusion around that is, and I've always got a bit of a bugbear about making financial situations as complicated as possible rather than simplifying it for people to be able to understand. Because obviously, we've all read the statistics that financial literacy in Australia seems to be trending downwards badly, right?
Mm. Mm.
To the point where a lot of people can't even read a payslip, which I think is a real concern. But that's
Yes.
a subject for another day. But yeah, it's just to be able to understand that and to get your head around that is a difficult concept because unfortunately, like you say, Tracy, an SMSF is a trust structure. No,
Mm.
no different really to any other trust that's out there. Obviously, different from the point of view of you've got different governing legislation and regulations that to what you can do within that trust. But it really is a
Yes.
trust structure like any other trust structure,
Yes.
having a trust deed and trustees and all that sort of thing, right? But here's the kicker. In financial services terms, it is referred to and defined as a product.
Yes.
Now, again, so what's the first thing that comes into your mind as a financial product? It's probably a managed fund or something
Yeah.
like that. So
Yeah.
all of a sudden, if you start to conflate these ideas, then it's like, oh no, hang on, but Tracy, it's a product. So doesn't
Yeah.
that mean that it's linked to the investment side of things? Because aren't they financial? Isn't that what we're talking about with financial products?
And
Well,
this
yeah,
is the
it
problem.
is, but
This is the problem.
it's not the same thing. Well, how isn't it the same thing? That's a financial product. This is a financial product.
Yes.
Isn't it the same? And that's where I think we get ourselves into a lot of trouble. That
Yes.
because and again, it's usually not until something goes wrong that these classifications come out, that these definitions
Absolutely.
come out, because then they have to be tested within a legal sense. And of course, when you're talking about legality, then you will go to the letter of the legislation and the law to say that, well, actually, technically, yeah, this should have been done.
Yes.
But I think
Yes.
that that just confuses the hell out of everybody because the
It really
language
does.
isn't consistent. And then
Yes.
you're talking about the perception of something that is completely different to an SMSF,
Yes.
but that seed has already been sown, unfortunately.
Yes, I agree with you. And I think that I'm a strong proponent for education, as you know, and you are and I are on the same page with this in the regard of trustee. It's so important for trustees to be educated and empowered with knowledge to be able to know that they are making the best decision for themselves. Doesn't mean that they are going to have 100% certainty over a decision because there's no such thing as 100% certainty.
No.
There's no such thing as perfection. My husband is not listening to this podcast, I don't think, so I can pretend to. But I think that giving people knowledge and helping them to understand what can be done, what can't be done. What are the risk factors that sit within the self-managed super fund world when they are the trustees and they're responsible for those decisions that they need to make? That's the best gift that we can give them. So is to give them that education piece.
Yeah, one of the other things you highlighted when we were talking about this offline was
Yeah.
the fact that ASIC flagged something about advisors shouldn't be order takers.
Yeah.
What do they mean by that? And again, this paint, I hate repeating myself, but this does paint some context around and I'm not talking about the dodgy people that they've potentially busted here, but it does show the fine line that an advisor can actually tread in this area. It's not quite as black and white as people would like to paint it out to be.
Yes. So that comes under the action point, Darin. The whole concept of order taker comes under the action point that ASIC has titled, "Do not recommend an SMSF if it will expose the client to unnecessary and inappropriate risks." So it says financial advisors should not act as order takers. Before recommending clients roll over their retirement savings to an SMSF, and this is the interesting part because, yes, you're putting your retirement savings in an SMSF, but there are underlying investments that have to be decided upon. Financial advisors are expected to investigate and assess the SMSF and how it might meet the objectives and needs of the client. So ASIC's language is very confusing here, I think, because it's not the how can you investigate and assess an SMSF, because the SMSF doesn't have any investments at that point, right? So it's got to be the investments that have to be looked at, not just the SMSF structure itself. And it says, meet the objectives and needs of the client, including in circumstances where the client has requested advice to establish an SMSF. Advisors should not recommend an SMSF to a client if the SMSF and or its proposed investments are likely to expose the client to unnecessary and inappropriate risks. So
Yeah,
I'm not sure how an SMSF itself is going to be create an unnecessary risk, because if an SMSF is only invested in cash, I guess maybe that's the risk that they're talking about, that they're going to be out of the market. But again, that's just an investment that is sitting under the SMSF. So I'm sorry harping on about that. I'll stop harping about it now. But the order taking part of the whole ASIC thing is, in my mind, it's basically you can't recommend to roll over your super into a self-managed super fund without undertaking all of these things. You can't say, well, the client asked me to do it, so that's what I'm doing. Can't just
yeah,
be the
and of
cyclical.
course,
No.
advisors right now are wrestling with that as we speak because
Mm.
the number of SMSFs that are being established without advice is actually on the rise. There's a
Yeah,
myriad of reasons behind that,
yes,
but this is an issue that the sector has recognised. Whether or not they've identified every single trigger point as to why it is going on is doubtful, but
yes,
they certainly have flagged it and they are looking to see why it's going on and obviously
yes,
what can be done about it. But it could actually be in a perverse sort of way that people setting SMSFs up without advice is because the advisor is not being an order taker.
maybe,
It's kind of sort of a bit perverse, isn't it?
yeah.
That it would occur like that, but that could be the chain of events.
Yes. Well, the thing is, Darin, like you don't have to see an advisor to set up a self-managed super fund, do you?
No,
So
no,
if you
not at
go
all.
to an advisor, so I'm wanting to set up a self-managed super fund, and I come to you and I'm like, Daz, I want to set up a self-managed super fund and I want to do X, Y, and Z. And you say to me, well, I'm not sure that that's going to be appropriate for you, Tracey, and blah, 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 blah. And I'll say, no, but that's what I want to do. I've already made that decision. I want to do
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
And you have to say, well, no, you can't under this kind of recommendation, because you might see, or you might perceive that there is a risk, an unnecessary or an inappropriate risk for me setting up a self-managed super fund. Am I going to say, oh, okay, Darin, yeah, you're right, I'm wrong, I'm not going to do what I want to do now, I'll do what you think I should do? 9 times out of 10, you'll probably go, all right, thanks very much. I'll go down the road and talk to Joe, and ask Joe to set up an SMSF for me. Like, people get fixated on what they want to do. And if that's what they want to do, then it's not really up to the financial advisor to prevent them from doing it, if they're going to do it
Yeah.
anyway. I don't know. Like, how do
It's a,
you fix that?
well, it's a bit of a fine line. As I said, look, at the top of this episode, I don't think that whatever conclusions that people like to draw is as cut and dried
It's not.
as
That's the point.
as
Yeah.
some of the conclusions that are possibly being drawn
Yes.
here. I mean, to me, there's a whole shade of grey in here. And
Yes.
again, no context is ever explained around what sort of advisor you are seeing, whether
No.
or not it's a specialist SMSF advisor or a generalist. And
Yes.
again, um, there's no preventing a situation like you said, Tracey, that I refuse to be an order taker. So no, Darin, I'm sorry, it's not right for you. All right, well, the guy across the road, let's see what he's got to say about it. Yeah, sure, Darin, I can do that for you, whatever. He's
Yeah.
probably one of these red flag guys that ASIC knocked on the door. But that's how the cycle kind of perpetuates a little bit, isn't it? So
Yeah.
I'm not saying that uh, you know, advisors should be order takers, and of course they shouldn't be order takers. It's
No.
just a recognition of sometimes they're in a bit of a tough spot here. Where
Yeah.
we've got to tread a bit of a fine line, and again, that's grey. It's not necessarily
Yeah.
black and white. It's a little bit like
Absolutely.
the licensed conversation, isn't it?
Yes.
I'm not licensed to give advice, so I can tell you about this. As the conversation progresses, as we normally do, it goes off into different directions the longer you go on with. It's not human nature to be able to just cut it off and say that, oh, I can't talk about that.
No.
Sorry.
Yeah.
That's grey. I mean, you're not going to go into chapter and verse to say that, oh yeah, I can give you an investment portfolio or whatever. It's usually around those edges that it's a little bit tricky. And it's
Yes.
tricky. It's not
Yes.
straightforward.
Yes. And I think that, in my experience with dealing with clients for so long, there have been clients that I've spoken to over the years, and particularly when I was an advisor, where I knew that an SMSF wasn't going to be the best option for that particular client because of the investment of energy and time that they would need to put into it, right? So I knew that that was going to be a potential problem. And so it was about me educating them and helping them to understand all of the potential issues that might arise. And, once we actually worked through those issues, they went, yeah, no, I don't want to have to deal with all of that stuff. I don't want to have to deal with it. Okay, well, maybe then an SMSF isn't for you. Maybe we need to look at some of the other options. So you don't know what you don't know. And I guess, coming back to ASIC saying about not being an order taker, I agree. Advisors should not be an order taker. And I just am a little bit fearful that we go so far the other way that advisors can't give advice at the end of the day because, how much time can they spend with these potential clients around setting up these structures that the client is not going to listen to them anyway because they're really headstrong on wanting to do something because their mate down the road told them to. So
Yeah.
it just puts more of an onus on advisors in an industry that is losing advisors, and it is that grey area and that fine line over and over and over again.
Yeah. And Tracy's living proof of that non-order taker because time and time again she reiterates the fact that she doesn't like children being included in an SMSF.
Exactly.
Now, I am a child in an SMSF, so that could have been a situation where no, I want that and off we go. So
Yeah, absolutely.
there you go. She doesn't think that that's suitable.
There
Me,
you
as
go.
an SMSF trustee and as an SMSF member, I did think it was applicable for us. And I'm still trying to prove Tracey wrong that there can be outliers outside the bell curve that can make it work. Was there anything
I love hearing the story of it.
was there anything else that you wanted to highlight out of the ASIC report?
No, not really, Darin. I think that the main thing from my perspective is that people just understand if they hear about this report or they've read some of the, more sensationalist kind of media articles around it, that they do understand that it was a very targeted report, that the SMSF industry is in no way, shape, or form, in my opinion, as grim as some people like to point out that it is. That we are always going to have circumstances within the industry where SMSFs are not appropriate for certain people, just like industry funds are not appropriate or retail funds are not appropriate. There's good, bad, and ugly of all parts of the industry. And I just want those who have their own SMSF to kind of take a step back and to really think about why they set up the SMSF in the first place, what investments they've got in the SMSF. It's not a set and forget forever strategy to have an SMSF. And so it's a good reminder for everyone to, do that kind of, take stock and, what have they got themselves into with this? And is it still appropriate for them moving forward? And if not, seek some advice and go a different direction.
Yeah, certainly the readership that we've spoken to and the feedback that we get would actually suggest that you're all over this and you're obviously doing the right thing and you're treating your responsibilities properly, which is fantastic because that's what
Yes.
we want. But while a lot of this probably doesn't apply to you, we just wanted to make sure that you're not reading this and thinking it's just completely doom and gloom and some of the conclusions being drawn from this ASIC report are gospel and exactly accurate because I don't think they are. And
No.
basically, a lot of what the naysayers are saying, and particularly in regard to rolling over and putting them into dodgy investments, which eventually collapse because the product provider has gone into some sort of difficulty in sustaining that investment fund. I think it always comes back to the common sense principle that if it sounds like it's too good to be true, I think that article referred to, or somebody else referred to, promising returns of 8 to 10% with some of these
Mm.
investments. If you do a comparison and think that, wow, that's really high compared to some of the other stuff that I've seen, or maybe what your existing super fund is providing, well, there's probably a reason for that. And yeah, if it sounds like it's too good to be true, then I would say 9 times out of 10 it probably is. And
Probably is.
even if
Yeah.
it is deliverable, you always have to think about how much risk is involved with that, because
Yeah.
obviously it's a risk and reward return equation, and
Yeah.
you can't get the higher returns without taking a substantial amount of risk, and that's
Yeah.
certainly something to be conscious of. And again, it's just a common sense approach, I think. But we just wanted to paint some context around it. So if you get wind of this report, it's not all bad. You have to look at it in the proper light that it was designed for,
Yes.
and just be conscious of the conclusions that are drawn that might not be 100% accurate. Certainly not in my opinion, anyway.
Totally agree, Darren. And I think that it's important to know what's out there, and it's important to understand the context of some of these things that are in the media, so that you're armed with knowledge, empowered with knowledge to be able to answer people if they ask you why.
And my last warning would be you will probably find more and more of these articles and conclusions being drawn because if you haven't heard already, there's this massive issue about First Guardian
Yeah.
Master Trust and Shield Master Trust, which have both collapsed. And that is a black swan event for the industry, and that is already causing a lot of pain, but it is
Yeah.
about to cause even more pain as far as that goes. There is no doubt that they will tie that in to these conclusions because that is another product collapse, particularly if you roll your money into an SMSF and then invested in one of those two collapsed products.
Yeah.
So just a word of warning that, yeah, just be aware that some of the articles that will probably be written and some of the news reports, which will probably be filed in the very near future around those two product collapses, may not be as accurate as they would seem. Definitely a concerning situation, but you're likely to see a slightly higher proliferation of these types of reports. So just
Yeah,
contextualize that
definitely.
and keep that in the back of your mind. It's not all doom and gloom, but
No.
it is a serious issue, but it's not, the SMSF sector is evil because a lot of
Yeah.
people get caught up in that. That's not true. That's not true at all.
No, definitely not. And if anyone wants to read the 39 pages like I did, then go to the ASIC or just search ASIC report 824 and you'll be able to get a PDF of the report, have a little bit of a read over a cup of
Yeah.
tea.
If it's a hot summer night and you're having trouble sleeping, get the
Have a read
ASIC
of the
report
ASIC
out.
report.
I'm sure that will help you along the way somehow. Um, I certainly won't be won't be reading it in bed because I always don't have any trouble sleeping, actually. So, on that note, I will thank Tracey again for joining me for this episode of the podcast. Thank you, Tracey, and thank you. Very informative about some of the stats that you quoted as far as that ASIC report goes.
My pleasure, Darin. It's good to be a part of the podcast again. Look forward to the next one.
Thank you very much to Superfund Property Valuations for its continued support of these episodes. Thank you again to my team who put this all together and put them onto the platforms where we publish these podcasts. But most importantly, thank you to you for listening. We hope that you find these sessions informative and enjoy listening to them as much as we enjoy bringing them to you. So until next time, bye for now, and we'll see you when we next put together a trusted trustee podcast. Travel safely and see you then.
Thanks again. Bye for now.